Good stuff right there, Dan. Do you like what you've seen from Shedeur so far?
I do. He's playing faster. That's probably the biggest gripe of him coming out of school. This is an elite throw under a real NFL pocket. You cannot play and/or throw it better than those clips right there.
In the world of the NFL media, there is nothing harder to find than an admission of guilt. Analysts get paid to have strong opinions, and they almost never back down from them, even when they are dead wrong. But today, we are witnessing one of the most stunning reversals in the history of sports commentary. Dan Orlovsky has been forced to eat every single word of criticism he ever threw at Shedeur Sanders. Folks, this isn't just a slight change of opinion or a minor adjustment to his draft board. This is a complete and total 180-degree turn that has left the entire football world watching in disbelief. The man who was the loudest critic has suddenly become the loudest supporter, and the tape is the reason why.
So a lot of people want to see me fail, and it ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen.
We need to really appreciate the gravity of this situation because it almost never happens. For those who remember the pre-draft process, Dan Orlovsky didn't just question Shedeur Sanders' ability, he outright dismissed it. He looked at the Colorado tape and he didn't see a franchise quarterback. He saw flaws. He saw limitations. He saw a player who he believed would get eaten alive by NFL defenses. The processing speed was too slow, the athleticism was average at best, the ability to handle the crushing pressure of an NFL pocket was questionable. These weren't small critiques. These were career-defining labels that Orlovsky slapped onto Shedeur before he ever took a professional snap.
I would actually be most encouraged by. One of the things for Shedeur coming out of the draft that I was critical of was I don't think he's a ridiculous athlete, not a high-end athlete, kind of average.
Orlovsky stood on national television and laid out all the reasons why Shedeur Sanders wouldn't translate to the professional level. He was one of the loudest voices telling everyone to pump the brakes. He told us not to get caught up in the hype. He told us to remember that college success doesn't always mean NFL readiness. It was a constant barrage of doubt. But before we get into the incredible moment where Dan realized he was wrong, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We are breaking down the biggest storylines in the NFL every single day, and you do not want to miss what we have coming next. Now, let's get back to this shocking turnaround.
I do. He's playing faster. That's probably the biggest gripe of him coming out of school.
But then something incredible happened. Something that has forced Dan Orlovsky to do the one thing analysts hate doing most. He had to admit he was completely and undeniably and embarrassingly wrong. The biggest gripe was always the speed of the game. Orlovsky was convinced Shedeur played too slow. This was the red flag that scouts circled in blood-red ink. This was the criticism that was supposed to keep Shedeur Sanders from ever becoming a legitimate NFL starter. The narrative was set. He holds the ball too long, he doesn't see the field fast enough, he is going to get sacked into oblivion. And now? Now Dan Orlovsky is watching the tape and he is seeing ghosts. He is admitting that the exact thing he criticized is no longer a problem. In fact, it has become one of Shedeur's greatest strengths. The thing he said would doom Shedeur's NFL career is actually the reason he is succeeding. This is the same Dan Orlovsky who questioned Shedeur's deserved first-team reps. This is the same guy who questioned Shedeur's processing speed. This is the same analyst who doubted Shedeur's arm talent. And now he is on television breaking down throws that only franchise quarterbacks make. He is looking at the screen in awe.
This is an elite throw under a real NFL pocket. You cannot play and/or throw it better than those clips right there.
You simply cannot play it better. That is the quote. That is what Dan Orlovsky said. Let that sink in for a second. That is not qualified praise. That isn't saying he is improving. That isn't saying he is showing promise. That isn't saying, let's wait and see if he can do it consistently. That is Dan Orlovsky looking at Shedeur Sanders' tape and declaring it is as good as quarterback play gets in the National Football League. He used the words, "You cannot play it better." That is the highest form of praise you can possibly give a quarterback. So what changed? How did we get here? How did Shedeur Sanders go from being dismissed as too slow and not athletic enough to being praised as elite by the very same people who doubted him? How did a quarterback who supposedly had fundamental flaws force a complete reversal from one of the league's most prominent analysts? This doesn't happen by accident. This happens because the talent was undeniable. This happens because the work ethic was real. This happens because the narrative was wrong from the very beginning. Let's rewind to where this all started, because understanding the full context makes Dan Orlovsky's reversal even more stunning. We have to talk about the situation in Cleveland. The Cleveland Browns are a disaster. There is no other way to put it. They are a complete organizational train wreck that somehow managed to get messier with every passing week. The offensive line is a sieve. The coaching decisions are baffling. The atmosphere is toxic. This is not an environment where rookie quarterbacks are supposed to succeed. This is where careers go to die.
Prove to me that he's absolutely demanding of more reps with the second and first teams, against the second and first teams.
During the game against Baltimore, things took a turn for the worse. Dillon Gabriel takes a brutal hit in the second quarter, with Cleveland leading 13-10. He is down on the field. He is not getting back up. The trainers rush out. It is concussion protocol, and everyone in the stadium knows what that means. It means the backup is coming in. It means Shedeur Sanders is entering the game. The backup who supposedly wasn't ready. The rookie who supposedly hadn't earned first-team reps. The quarterback who Dan Orlovsky said needed to prove he couldn't do it before getting real opportunities. But here is where the story takes an absolutely insane turn that makes Dan's criticism look even worse in hindsight. The narrative was, prove to me, show me you deserve it, demonstrate NFL readiness. But Dan, I have to ask you a serious question. How is a rookie quarterback supposed to prove anything when his own team won't even let the offensive line hear his voice before throwing him into the fire? The Browns gave him zero preparation. They gave him zero first-team reps. They treated him like an afterthought. And then they expected him to save the day against a relentless Baltimore defense. The hypocrisy from the media was stunning because just weeks earlier, after watching Shedeur's preseason performance against Carolina, Dan Orlovsky was singing a completely different tune. He praised Shedeur's comfort, he loved his control, he raved about his processing speed and poise. He said Shedeur looked like he had all the answers to the test. He said the Browns should be giving him first-team reps immediately. He was all in on the Shedeur hype train after that Carolina game. He saw the potential. He saw the talent.
Prove to me you can't do it. Prove to me you can't do it. And so far, he has not done that.
But then the narrative shifted again. Prove to me you can't do it. That was Dan's message after the preseason. Shedeur looked so good that Dan wanted him getting starting opportunities. But then when Shedeur gets thrown into an impossible situation with zero preparation, suddenly it is time to pump the brakes. Suddenly the standards change. Suddenly the goalposts move. When the situation got tough, the support vanished. It felt like the media was waiting for him to fail, just so they could say they were right all along. You can't have it both ways. But here is what makes this entire saga so beautifully satisfying. Shedeur Sanders didn't just bounce back from that Baltimore disaster. He didn't crumble under the weight of the criticism. He came back and played at such an elite level that Dan Orlovsky had no choice. He had absolutely zero choice but to reverse every criticism he ever made. The tape was too good to ignore. The throws were too precise to dismiss. The command of the offense was too evident to deny. The processing speed that was supposedly too slow, now it is elite. Orlovsky is pointing out how fast Shedeur gets through his reads. The athleticism that was supposedly average, Shedeur is making plays with his legs that impress Dan. He's extending plays and escaping the pocket. The ability to handle pressure that was supposedly questionable, he is delivering throws in collapsing NFL pockets that only high-level starters make. He is standing tall and delivering strikes while taking hits.
I would actually be most encouraged by. One of the things for Shedeur coming out of the draft that I was critical of was I don't think he's a ridiculous athlete, not a high-end athlete, kind of average.
I was critical of. That is past tense. Dan is admitting his pre-draft evaluation was wrong. He is admitting the things he thought would be problems aren't actually problems. He is admitting Shedeur Sanders is better. He is significantly better than he gave him credit for. That is what eating your words looks like in real time. It is rare, and it is satisfying. It proves that the pre-draft narratives were just noise. It proves that the scouts and the analysts missed the mark on this kid from Colorado. Dan Orlovsky broke down Shedeur's tape, and what he found shocked him. The traditional bootleg execution was perfect. The mechanics were flawless. The 60-yard touchdown showed processing that only veterans typically display. He manipulated the safety with his eyes and delivered a perfect ball. The protection changes demonstrated NFL-level command. He was identifying the blitz and adjusting the line. Every single thing Dan criticized was being done at an elite level. And the Browns saw it too. They couldn't ignore it either. They named Shedeur Sanders their starting quarterback for the rest of the season. This wasn't a charity decision. This wasn't because of potential. This wasn't because of draft position. This was because the tape proved he is the best quarterback on their roster right now. He earned it on the field. He earned it in the film room. He earned it by outplaying the competition and silencing the doubters.
It hasn't been unbelievably perfect, but man, the stuff that you saw in college and even in that Rams preseason game that gave you just some reservations, I think week by week there's just been a little bit of a step forward in some of those flaws. This weekend he played at a very high level.
Week by week there has been a step forward. The flaws are disappearing. He played at a very high level. That is Dan Orlovsky admitting the progression is real. That is Dan admitting Shedeur is eliminating the exact concerns he raised. That is Dan being forced by undeniable evidence to completely reverse his position. From telling us to pump the brakes to telling us you cannot play it better. From questioning NFL readiness to praising high-level starting quarterback play. From skepticism to admiration. That is not just changing your mind. That is a complete reversal forced by tape that doesn't lie. And here is what makes this story even more compelling. Shedeur never stopped working, even when the Browns refused to give him reps. Even when the organization treated him like an afterthought, even when analysts like Dan questioned whether he belonged, he kept his head down and he worked every day in the film room, asking questions without fear, bringing energy to the locker room, staying poised under pressure. These are the intangibles you can't coach. These are the traits that separate good quarterbacks from great ones. You can fix footwork, you can teach a playbook, but you cannot teach that fire. You cannot teach that leadership, and Shedeur Sanders has all of them. And yet, when his opportunity finally came, he was ready. Despite the organizational failure, despite the lack of preparation, despite critics like Dan Orlovsky telling everyone to slow down, Shedeur Sanders proved he belonged at the highest level.
The facility, I see him in the office every day with Coach Stefanski, like just going over film. I see him in there asking questions, and he's not afraid to ask questions. So just for him to be, that poised rookie and stuff like that, that's not afraid to go out.
Are there still areas to improve? Of course there are. He's a rookie. Dan himself pointed out a red zone play where Shedeur needed better drift. He noted a moment where he needed to beat the last defender with his throw. But notice how the criticism has shifted. These are coaching points now. These are minor details. These are fixable with reps and experience. Those aren't fundamental flaws anymore. Those aren't reasons to doubt whether a quarterback can succeed in the NFL.
Are there still issues? 100%. Down in the red zone, all-out pressure. You have to drift. I love the fact that he backpedals. You got to beat the last guy with the throw.
And that is the crucial distinction Dan Orlovsky finally understands. The things he criticized before the draft, like the processing speed and the athleticism, were supposed to be fundamental limitations. Those were supposed to be reasons Shedeur couldn't make it. But they were never real limitations. They were narratives. They were talking points. They were reasons for analysts to doubt without truly studying the man behind the face mask. And now, the tape has spoken with undeniable clarity. Shedeur Sanders processes at NFL speed. He makes elite throws under pressure. He plays faster than he did in college. He is proving every criticism wrong, one game at a time. The Cleveland Browns now have 4 games left with Shedeur Sanders as their starting quarterback. 4 games to continue this remarkable progression. 4 games to prove he is the long-term answer. 4 games to cement his status as a legitimate NFL starter. And you better believe Dan Orlovsky will be watching every snap. He will be analyzing every throw. He will be breaking down every decision. And if Shedeur continues playing the way he has been, then Dan will have no choice but to keep praising him. If he keeps processing at elite levels and keeps making throws that only high-level starters make, Dan will have to keep eating his words. Because you can't argue with the tape. You can't deny elite quarterback play. You can't ignore progression that is happening right before your eyes. Dan Orlovsky went from being one of Shedeur Sanders' harshest critics to one of his biggest admirers. That transformation didn't happen because Dan changed what he values in a quarterback. It happened because Shedeur Sanders forced him to change. He forced him to change by playing at a level that can't be ignored, it can't be denied, and it can't be dismissed. This is what happens when talent meets opportunity. This is what happens when a quarterback refuses to let organizational failure or harsh criticism define his career. This is what happens when you are good enough to make even your biggest doubters admit they were wrong. Shedeur Sanders has silenced his critics, he has proven his doubters wrong, and he has forced analysts like Dan Orlovsky to do the hardest thing in sports media. He forced them to eat their words and admit defeat. The kid from Colorado is ready. The tape proves it, the progression confirms it, and now, finally, even the harshest critics are being forced to acknowledge it. The only question left is simple. How long before everyone else catches up to what Dan Orlovsky has finally figured out? Shedeur Sanders is the real deal, and no amount of doubt or criticism or organizational failure was ever going to change that. The future is bright, and the tape tells the whole story.